Took a train ride this week and I did not get kicked off, which is a positive. You got to take them one at a time. Took a train ride to Munich. I was looking for a English bookstore, an all English bookstore, which has been hard to find here in Regensburg. And I was able to find a whole secondhand English bookstore. So I was able to pick up some books, hang out in Munich for the day, and did not get kicked off the train. And I love trains in general. I love riding on the train. I find it very peaceful. And the train actually led to my favorite observation of the week, which was the guy sitting across from me. Some of the seats on the train face each other, and there's a table in the middle, so a lot of the people working will sit in those seats. And the gentleman sitting across from me looked to be an architect, like he had some blueprints, and he was, working slowly, and I was kind of just observing him work, and it was my favorite observation was how he kind of slowed down his work and sat back and took a break. And then all of a sudden you could see ideas like come to him one at a time, one after the next. And it was like a flurry of writing, boom, note, boom, note, boom, note. And it was cool to just observe like someone else in their creative space and just see how the ideas came to him purely from having the tools in front of him. And I like to write a lot on the train, and it's like, you think of ideas or you have a thought, but the pen and paper are in your bag. As opposed to, even if I'm not, looking for something, or I'm not in a space where I'm like, okay, I'm going to write right now. Having the pen and paper in front of you just invites the opportunity for, if that thought comes to you, you're able to write it down. Similar to the gentleman I was observing, was he just had the pen and paper in front of him, and he's looking over the blueprints, making a couple notes, and all of a sudden it was just like one after the next for maybe 5-10 minutes, just a flurry of ideas, and then he rested after that, and you just never know when that flurry is going to arrive. And so it comes down to having the tools in front of you. You inevitably have the tools, pen and paper, maybe it's a computer, maybe it's a camera, whatever it may be, but having those tools out in front of you and just out in the open, like ready to be used. Not necessarily that they have to be used at that moment, but the takeaway for me from that was like, oh, if I just leave my pen and paper out, I don't necessarily need to sit down and be like, oh, now's the time to write. It's just having it out, and then, one thought leads to the next, and then you fill up a whole page or pages. That, along with riding the train at sunset, was just beautiful. Last night when I came back from Munich, riding the train at sunset, and the orange mixed with blues, and then you're seeing the planes in the air, and and the turbulence they leave behind. I need to find out that word, but whatever that smoke, that cloud that they leave behind them, and it's just like, you could see all the planes up in the air as we're gliding along the tracks, and that was a very peaceful end to the day. Allergies out here are crazy, man. High pollen count in Regensburg. I have heard that there's a lot of bees here in the summertime, which we're in the midst of spring right now, so it's not summer yet, but I've heard the bees become out and about in the summertime heavily. That remains to be seen. Anyways, allergies have been an obstacle that we're overcoming one day at a time. Moving from observations into kind of the word or the theme that I took with me this week that I wrote about was mythopoesis. And so if we can recall back from the previous weeks, poesis is is making, it is the theory, poesis, praxis. Poesis is making. Myth, is a story, speech, or tale that is not necessarily fictional in the modern sense, but it's often carrying symbolic or a cultural truth. And the exact definition of mythopoesis is the act or process of creating myths or mythic narratives, especially as a way to express, shape, or explain fundamental truths about existence, culture, or the self. So it's storytelling. Storytelling, which is, been around since people been around, I guess. But as I dove more into the thought, it kind of relates that it normally starts with a fundamental truth. And from that truth, we expand and create this myth, this story, and it's the act of storytelling. And I think everyone knows or has someone that comes to mind when you're like, man, who's a good storyteller? Good storytellers are always just people that, you want to be around. They got some type of, stories happen every day. It's happening right now. And the ability to tell a story in like a captivating way, I mean, that's like, there's nothing cooler than that. It gets you, in. It brings you back to your childhood when your parents used to tell you stories. And it's just such a skill. And it's an innate skill, but I think it's also one that when you become more observant or aware, the stories start to become more clear, or I'm able to like think back and then create the story. One of the things I do when I hike, especially alone, is I'll just tell stories out loud. Maybe that sounds crazy, but yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do is to think back upon all the travels or whatever it may be and like act as if I'm telling someone a story. I'm just telling myself the story. But I think it kind of makes me a better storyteller. Also brings to life moments that maybe we let pass and don't think of anything. And that kind of leads into the idea of a mythopoesis, which is, there's a tipping point when it comes to this idea. And I think it comes down to two options. And you have the option to, let this story become a constructive synchronicity or an affirmation, challenge or growth on your like hero's journey. Or the other option is to let that story become destructive to the self. See this event as like punishment, random, or some cruelty. You always have those two options. And I think that's where the state of an individual kind of influences their psychology, physiology influencing psychology. And when we're in a good internal state, we're able to see and experience all of these stories as just synchronicities on our own, path of like what the hero's journey is, to relate it to the book The Alchemist. And I kind of put it under like three umbrellas where you have, these micro myths that are the daily little events, maybe they happen at the grocery store, tiny little events that make up our journey. And, they're a collection, a small bunch. Think of a bunch of grains of sand. And then you have, the personal narrative, which is our individual story, and all these little micro myths make up our personal narrative. They create this like storyline that we're on, and we're able to be like, oh, I am on the right path. Like things are happening for me. That's the best way to put it. Things are happening for me, not to me. They're happening for me. And then under the larger umbrella is the collective mythos, which is how each of our personal narratives create, society, or create like a grander operation that's taking place. And if, you kind of zoom out, like when, when I like watch ants, from above, I'm watching ants, and, each of the little individual ants is doing their own thing, their personal narratives. And it's creating this like collective mythos, which is the whole, I don't know, what's a bunch of ants called? An ant farm? Even if they're not? Sure, we'll call it the herd of ants. The herd of ants is creating their collective mythos, but only through each individual action. And I think it really comes down to the micro myths. Being able to recognize that things are happening for me, not to me. And that, that kind of blends into the story of essentially how I got out here. I got released in July, and then I went out to Spain for a month, and I kind of came back, and I was like, man, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? And so I went and I got yoga teacher certified, and I thought I was gonna get into like online coaching for baseball, and that just wasn't speaking to me. And then I slowly thought about what helped shift my career in the most positive direction, and it was really like breath work, and that breath work led to mindfulness, which led to all these other practices. And the synchronicities come in. I guess I've noticed synchronicities for quite a while now. Ever since I really read The Alchemist a couple years ago, you start to like just pay attention. Be like, man, things are happening for me. And so one day this fall, I hadn't picked up a bat since July. I hadn't even thought about it. I was okay being done playing baseball. And I'm waiting to work out with a buddy, and we're at a facility, and he's running late. And so I'm like, you know what? I'll just pop in the cage and take a couple swings just to warm up. First time I'd swung since the last game I played in July. And this is probably October. And I take a couple swings, go back to my phone, and an old college teammate had texted me asking if I would be interested in playing in Germany. It's like, And I had played in Mexico with a teammate by the name of Mitch Lively. Shout out Mitch Lively, one of the coolest teammates I've ever had. And the big takeaway I had from Mitch was he had played all over the world, all kinds of leagues: Japan, Korea, Mexico, Venezuela, the Dominican, everywhere, high-level baseball. Played in the States, and he always told me never say no to a job. Like, you can say no later on, but when someone asks you, you let that marinate, sit with it. And so taking that advice, when the Germany opportunity came about, I was like, okay, think about it. But the synchronicity comes in when it's like, oh, I hadn't touched a bat in 4 or 5 months, and now the first time I touch a bat, I get a text while I'm swinging the bat that is an invitation to play in Germany, which I had already planned to come back to Europe for the summer. And so it's like, man, like noticing that those two things are aligned, like there's a greater, this is the personal narrative coming into play. And then if we fast forward, we go to December, and I hadn't swung since that day. Had not swung. I knew I was going to go to Germany, already signed, had not swung. Wake up, and I'm like, okay, like I should probably, swing a bat before I go out there, before I come out here. So I text a buddy, ask him if he'll just like soft toss me some balls. And he says, yeah. So that day I take like 20 swings. First time I had swung since October when the opportunity came about before. Day passes, laying in bed that night, get a call from an old teammate who's in Australia and says, hey, we need a second baseman for the end of the season. Would you want to come? I mean, like mind blown. Last 2 times I've swung a bat, I get an opportunity to play baseball around the world. And you can't deny those like synchronicities that are happening for me. So of course, I say yes, and that leads me out to Australia, where I play extremely well. I'm able to continue to grow personally through breathwork, visualization, all of these tools, and also like present some of my findings and explorations to other people who might find it interesting. That leads me out to Bali, where I meet Thea, the somatic practitioner, and then come back, go to Arizona. All these things are just creating the personal narrative and helping me in this collective mythos that is happening every day, with everyone being interconnected. Everyone's interconnected in some way. And I think once anyone becomes aware of like, oh, things are happening for me, and these synchronicities happen daily. It's the difference between looking down and deciding to look up. I'm going to look up, and I'm going to pay attention to what's around me, and you just begin to notice how many things are happening for me every day, all day. It's always happening for me. And it's just, tuning in that sense. And so that's why I thought mythopoesis was so relevant because it's like we're telling ourselves we're creating these stories, whether we want to or not. And it's the decision of, is this happening for me or to me? And oftentimes, if we're in the right state of being internally, the choice is made for us that like, oh, these things are happening for me. I'm meeting people who are aiding me in my hero's journey and I'm aiding them. And that's just the beautiful flow that life starts to become. And that's, what makes it so fun when you begin to notice those daily occurrences that are happening just from deciding to look up instead of down. So maybe we'll sit with that for a moment and just start to allow yourself to become aware of the numerous synchronicities that are happening for you. It happens to everybody. Nobody has synchronicities not happening for them. It's every day, all day. And yet you might go stretches where it's not one of those things you go looking for. It just presents itself. And sometimes the dots don't even get connected till later, like the baseball event of swinging the bat and then Germany and swinging the bat and then Australia. Those are prevalent, like right in front of me. But there's so many other little synchronicities that take place just daily, and those micro stories that happen each moment, and they're what makes life this like fun game that we're all getting to be a part of, have the privilege to be a part of. One thing, actually, let's pause. We'll just take a breath. Inhale through the nose. Exhale out the mouth, let it go. Inhale through the nose. Filling up in the belly. Expanding the ribs. Out the mouth. One of the things I take a lot of pride in, and this will actually come into the word for next week. One of the things I take a lot of pride in is, environment creation, creating an environment. And that's where I think taste comes into play. Creating an environment dependent upon the time of day, the people that are around, whether it's for yourself or others. And that, I think creating the environment comes with like, the sounds, so music or just the sounds of nature. When you go on a hike, okay, you're in an environment, but you can create the environment. You could put headphones in, or you could choose to leave headphones out, and those are going to create different environments for you. So it could be, music, it could be sound, it could be the type of food that you're going to lay out for an event. There's all these thoughts that go into creating an environment. And then I begin to understand what environments aid me in the state that I would like to be in. Okay, like if I want to be in a calmed, relaxed state, okay, well I'm gonna turn the big light off in my room and turn the lamp on. My music choice is going to be different. The place that I sit is going to be different. The book that I choose to read or the TV show that I choose to watch is going to be different. All of these things, it's just creating the environment. Someone comes over to your house and the environment you create for maybe a significant other is going to be a different environment that you create for a friend or a group of friends. And so being in tune with like asking, yourself, oh, what environment am I trying to create? And on a grander scheme, it's like, being a part of teams my whole life. I think that's where the best coaches really come into play in terms of what environment are they creating for the team to come together in the most effective way possible. And, the best coaches I've ever played for are one, the biggest thing is they're not afraid to be disliked because they know that in the grand scheme of things, Sometimes that makes the team come together, and that creates the environment in itself. And I just actually started reading Phil Jackson's book, 11 Rings, and he talks a lot about creating an environment amongst a team. Now, a basketball team is a smaller group of players, so creating that environment is going to be different than a baseball team. Understanding where your players are from, how they were raised, where they went to school, how did they get to this point, where are they in their careers, all these things, you take into account to create an environment. And one of my goals down the road one day, and I see myself doing this quite clearly, is working with athletes and teams, and it's creating an environment for space for the team to become more cohesive, and for an individual to become more cohesive with themselves. And, I think it starts with what environment are we trying to create here? And the breath does that perfectly. What state, what environment, my internal environment am I trying to create right now? Okay, do I want to have a heightened awareness and be super dilated and be in a sympathetic state? Okay, that's going to entail different breath work than if I want to relax, reset, let my guard down, really settle in. Maybe I'm not in a competitive state. That's going to entail different breath work. And as you maybe start to see, it's all coming back to the breath, essentially always. Creating an environment comes back to the breath. Because in order to create the environment for others, I have to start to refine my own taste in terms of what environment do I create for myself. And I think food is so cool in terms of going to restaurants all around the world and seeing the environments that a restaurant creates for a dining experience. The food is ultimately secondary, because the environment that's created is what the user, the diner, the dinee, the person eating, experiences first. Is you walk in the restaurant ooh, I like this vibe. Okay, and then more times than not, the food's going to be good. And sometimes you walk in and you're ooh, I don't like this vibe. And then it's do I trust myself enough to just walk out? And oftentimes I will if I walk into a restaurant and I get that bad vibe right away, it's we're going somewhere else. Especially if I'm by myself, I'll just walk right out. But in every group, there's essentially there's always going to be a person who's the leader, and it's up to them when they're creating the environment to kind of navigate and shift and see which way are we going, what environment am I creating, what's the lighting going to be, the music, the interior design of the room, the time of day that we're going to meet, the place that we're going to meet, outside, inside, the temperature of the room influences. There's just so many things that influence the environment. And then once we're in that environment, say we've set the environment, allowing both, if you're by yourself, allowing yourself to settle into that environment. It's not going to happen right away. You've set the stage. The lighting, the music, the temperature, all those things, the tastes, the smells, all those things are set. Okay, well, I'm not going to drop into it right away. It's going to take time. It's going to take time for me to decompress and relax and start to just settle into this space. And, that's something that takes time. I think with moving so frequently and being quite nomadic, I've learned that in a new place where I move, it takes me a month to start settling into the environment. What store do I like to go to? What coffee shops do I like? Trying different restaurants, little things trying to think of a little thing around here that maybe, where's a good place to sit in the sun? Where does the sun, which window, when I set my plants, okay, which window is going to get optimal light for my plants? It's all those things, those little micro, events that help you settle, ease into the space. Same thing when I meditate, it's I give myself the first few minutes or however long to settle in, maybe a little movement, settling in, wiggling into the space. Starts, the scratch, whatever. Allowing yourself to just, and give yourself the patience. It's not going to happen right away. And that's the same can be said for walking into someone else's environment, or say, you go over to a friend's house and there's already people there and you're walking into their environment. It's like, okay, I have to give myself the patience. I'm not going to feel comfortable right away. Even you could be as close, it could be your best friend, but like that dynamic, that environment is already flowing. You're jumping into like a moving river. And you didn't start at the origin point. You're like jumping in at a certain point. And so it's just allowing yourself the patience to be like, ooh, okay, how do I settle in best? Maybe I just observe for a bit and then I feel, or maybe for some people it's diving in and, creating the conversation right away or whatever it may be to allow themselves to settle into the environment. And then we all start to create that cohesive energy. And creation of environment is one of my favorite things because I love like interior design, cooking. It all comes with the senses, that innate sense of like, how does it feel? It's the best. It's the best. And when the environment is cohesive and it's smooth and it flows and it just feels right, like there's no better feeling than that. And that's through, refinement of our own taste. Refinement of my own taste allows me to get a better understanding of, okay, what type of environments do I like to create for myself? Okay, now if I'm creating for other people, what type of environments did they enjoy and how does that blend with how I see this environment being set? And it's, a collaborative effort. And the more people you add to that group, like on a team, that's where the patience comes in. And, being able to lean on other people and like, oh, what do you like? What is he like? How does the locker room dynamic out on the field, that environment, it all plays a role. It's like setting the water cooler at the end of the dugout or setting it in the middle. At the end of the dugout, maybe it's a little more isolated. That's going to create a different environment than the water cooler being in the middle of the dugout. That's going to create a different environment. Do you put your bat by yourself on the bench or do you put it in the rack? Neither being right or wrong. It's just a different environment. And it all comes down to like asking yourself, what type of environment am I trying to create? And I think, odds are if you're listening to this, you have your own bedroom, probably not. Maybe there's a homeless person listening, which would be pretty cool. There's a homeless person listening. Drop a comment. Hell yeah. But your bedroom is like the origin point of environment. Like what environment do I like to be in? I like to be, for me, it's like a clean environment with natural light. I really like that the plants that I've put in here add some texture to the room and add depth to the spacing. It's not just, walls, which I want to get some more of my photos printed out to add some different colors. And then it comes down to like, okay, same thing as having the paper in front of me with a pen. I have the yoga mat and I usually leave the yoga mat unrolled. Like I leave it out most of the time. One, because I never have my shoes on in the room. And so that creates a clean environment. And so I know that if I step on my yoga mat, it's fine. I have bare feet. And two, having the yoga mat invites the opportunity for like, maybe I will take a little stretch right now. Rather than like, oh, a stretch sounds nice, but that means I have to unroll the yoga mat, which is just an extra, you're just cutting out steps of the process and leaving the tools accessible all the time. And maybe some people don't even know what environment they enjoy. So you start to, just pay attention to what environments do I feel comfortable in, feel safe in, feel happy in, feel loved in. Just start to incorporate those little things that you notice about those environments into daily life and see how it plays. Like I know I went to a temple the other day at sunset. Well, I know the temple at sunset is going to put me in somewhat of an introspective state. I don't know exactly how I'm going to feel when I get there, obviously. but I know that it's going to, it's going to shift. That environment is going to influence the way that I feel, which led to some really great writing, at least what I thought. And so it's putting myself in the right environment to influence the state that I would like to be in. If I'm thinking like, man, I'd like to create right now. I'd really like to create. Okay, well, going to this temple at sunset is going to give a little like push forward towards creation, as opposed to being in my room watching YouTube. Like, that's not going to promote the creation. Maybe in a different way, but not in the way that I was seeking at that moment. And so, creating an environment, that's a topic that will thread in going forward, because it's one of my favorite things. It's the way you experience anything. It's the environment around us combined with the internal state, your internal state, my internal state, and the environment. And then it's like, oh, what do I get out of this? Little synchronicities every day. Beautiful. Just makes for a beautiful, beautiful life. And it's not always like it's, sunshine and rainbows. There's ebbs and flows that occur. But the little synchronicities just are more affirmation that I'm on the right path. I see them every day, and they come in weird ways. They come in like all different ways, not weird ways, all different ways. In Australia, I had these weird again. It's not, had these had these like music synchronicities where there were 2 times I was singing this song that my mom used to sing to me when I was a kid. My sunshine, my little sunshine. Maybe your parents sang that to you too. Hadn't thought of that song in 20 years. And I'm in the sauna one night, and I just started thinking of it, humming the melody, whatever. And then the next night, I go to a jazz show with a friend, and the last song they play is that song. And those are the things that are just like, what? Like, that is just clear as day. Like, keep going. I'm on the right place at the right time. And then a couple days later, my walkout song for 2021, which is one of my favorite seasons I've ever played, was Make the Road by Walking by the Medellin Street Band. And I mean, that's not a song that comes on many places. I've never heard it played in public before. And I'm at a flea market in Australia a couple days later, and I'm up on this balcony by myself in the back of the shop, and they have music going. I'm like, man, this music's good. And the next song that comes on is Make the Road by Walking by the Medellin Street Band. Great song. Go listen to it. But it's just like, oh man, I am right where I need to be. Keep going. It's like the little conveyor belts that move people along at the airport. It's just like you catch one of those synchronicities. It's like, whoop, you just get on the conveyor belt, and then you go walking again, and then who knows how long it is again before another synchronicity comes. Whoop, just keep going on that path. And sometimes, they nudge you to the right or to the left. Ooh, go over here, go over there. But just being aware and noticing those little synchronicities. Yeah, that felt good. Those 2 topics felt good and like personal and relevant to just what's been happening. There's just so many synchronicities taking place, and you start to realize there's really no mistakes. Like, there's no mistakes. It's just all leading to, the grander mythos that we're all a part of, and it's all created, in this personal narrative arc. And so, as we close out this episode, I leave you with a question. The question is, if love was a genre of music, what would it be? To you personally, when you think of love, what genre of music pops into your head right away? Creating the environment of love with music. And that concludes this episode of A Thought Experiment.